Why build a mountain of stone so precise it defies modern intuition, and then leave almost no record of how? Why carve shafts that aim at the sky, if the king's journey ended underground? In the next minutes, we'll test two stories you've heard. Royal tomb versus cosmic template. We'll weigh hard evidence, inscriptions, workers' towns, copper tools, against tantalizing astronomical alignments. If you've ever wondered whether Giza was built for resurrection or for resonance, you're in the right place. Welcome to Beyond the Ancient World. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Chapter 1. A mountain that thinks. You stand at the base and the earth feels engineered. The blocks climb like a frozen tide, yet the edges read with the care of a jeweler. How does something this heavy behave like an instrument? A mountain that seems to think, set not by whim, but by lines that refuse to drift. The paradox starts underfoot, a foundation broad enough to hold thousands of seasons, yet the limits are hair-thin. The four sides answer to one another across long distances, their corners pulled tight, as if the stone were stitched. Mortar slips between irregular cores in layers thinner than a fingernail, not to paste over sloppiness, but to seal decisions already made in the cut. Scale should invite slop. Instead, scale partnered with restraint. Engineers still argue over the workday that could make this possible without iron blades or wheeled carts on site. Not because they doubt human endurance, but because process must make precision repeatable. How do you maintain a shared reference across ramps, dust, and sun? How do you keep a datum alive when the build surface moves with every course? These are logistics questions dressed as mysteries. Cutting stone with copper sounds like a dare, yet controlled trials show how patience wins. Edge a copper saw with quartz sand, and the abrasive bites for the metal. The saw guides the grit eats the rock. It is slow, it is exact. The same story plays out with tubular drills. A soft metal crown, a hard mineral in the slurry, and a groove that deepens with each pass. The labor scales, but so does predictability. When the cut is patient, the joint can be trusted. Think of the whole as a stone clock whose hands never move. The face is alignment itself. You don't read it by motion. You read it by where it stands forever. Every course is a tick that never advances. Every corner a mark that tells you which way the world lies. The paradox is that permanence becomes the indicator. Survey data confirm a commitment to true north within a sliver of a degree. That claim carries weight because it has to survive both measurement and time. Sand shifts, casing stones erode, yet orientation remains legible. This is not decoration. It is intent pressed into ground truth. The base negotiates with the cardinal directions as if they were part of the blueprint, not a flourish added at the end. Why care so much? Because alignment can serve many masters at once. It can satisfy structural sanity, distribute loads, and steady courses. But it can also speak to belief. A line married to north tells a different story than a line that drifts with convenience. If you intend to stitch the resting place of a king to a map larger than Egypt, you start with a horizon that never lies. To make precision reproducible, you do not trust a single tool. You stack methods and let them argue. A survey grid casts a lattice over the site so that no point stands alone. Plumb bobs tie sky to ground with a thread that gravity keeps honest. Water levels spread a quiet plane through noise, equalizing high and low with a surface that finds its own truth. When one method drifts, the others pull it back. Error, treated like a wild animal, is corralled by redundancy. At the edges, you see the logic. The casing surfaces once gleamed, but it is the unseen that anchors the story. Cork blocks vary, yet the bed they rest upon reads carefully. Joints are tight where force travels and loosen where the load forgives. Precision concentrates where work and ritual demand it, not everywhere at once. This is not waste, it is strategy. Even the choice of mortar matters. Thin layers of gypsum paste fill microvoids and spread load evenly, so the stone does not rock on hidden high points. The stone carries the story. The mortar keeps the story from stuttering. When you compress 6 million tons into order, tiny films become policy. The debate about workflows without the wheel on the plateau is less about drama and more about sequencing. How many crews can hit the same standard without talking over each other? How do you hand off a reference from quarry to dressing yard to ramp without letting the message degrade? The answer is rhythm. Remeasure, remark, re-verify. A site is a living thing. A standard must be louder than fatigue. Underlying all of it is a conservative habit. Assume drift, plan correction. A line scribed on stone wears. A plumb wanders in wind. A water trench silts. So you pair a scribe with a check mark on another face. You shield plums and read them in shade. You clear and refill channels and read the meniscus at dawn when air is still. Each choice buys back a fraction of a degree. Call it a culture of alignment. A way of working where gravity, water, and the stars become partners in the build. You trust them because they do not answer to foremen. They answer to the same forces every day. The mountain seems to think because it was taught to listen to constants. All of this suggests a purpose beyond beauty. Lines this stubborn were meant to land somewhere, on an axis of belief, on a story written on the night. But a monument does not draw itself, and a plan does not walk stones to their beds. Precision has hands behind it, and those hands had homes, meals, and names. But before we follow the lines to the stars, we need to know who drew them. Chapter 2. The Builder's City. If slaves drag stones under whips, why do we find bakeries, medical care, and honor burials beside the site? The edge of the plateau holds a quieter monument, a planned town laid out in streets and long galleries, marked by ration records and work rosters. It does not read like a prison camp. It reads like a logistics base built to feed and house a shifting army of specialists. You walk the avenues and the ground is packed with the habits of a workforce. Rows of sleeping galleries face communal courtyards. Storage rooms stand along the lanes with jar stands and ceilings, telling you food moved with order. Nearby, broad bakeries and breweries turn out steady staples, the kind that can feed thousands without chaos. The smell of yeast and wood ash would have been constant. The menu is simple, but predictable, and in heavy labor, predictability is king. The myth insists on slave gangs under lash. The archaeology points to something else. Organized crews with schedules, rations, and a degree of status. Seasonal laborers rotate in, likely during the flood months when fields lie underwater and hands are free. Permanent craft people keep their posts year-round. The stone dressers, tool sharpeners, rope makers, and administrators who carry skill from one season to the next. This blend creates continuity without breaking the agricultural calendar. Provisioning was a machine in its own right. Grain arrives in bulk and is converted to bread and beer, the daily fuel. Meat allocations appear in the refuse and the records. Cattle and sheep bones sorted by butchery marks. Not random scraps from a riot of hunger, but portions that imply planned distribution. Beer, safer than raw water and rich in calories, flows in measured jars. The point is not luxury. The point is reliable energy on a scale matched to the work. Turn to the bodies for testimony. Skeletal remains show healed injuries, broken bones that knit, and workers who lived long enough to go back on duty. Joints wear in patterns that match lifting and hauling, but they also show pauses and recovery. In some cases, vertebrae fused by stress tell you the hours were hard. Yet healing means downtime, bandaging, and food kept coming while a worker mended. That is medical intervention, not an expendable population. You can read organization right off the stones. Blocks bear inked marks from crews. Gangs grouped into larger units called files, each with names and pride in their output. Those marks are more than graffiti. They are workflow. They tie a stone to a team and a schedule, linking quarry face to setting bed. When a block is traced to a crew, accountability is built into the fabric. The mountain keeps its own ledger. Administration radiates outward from the town. To the south and east, quarries show cut faces where sled tracks and staging areas would have stood. To the north, harbour facilities align with channels that meet the river, bringing boats alongside with timbers and stone. Delivery timetables sync with the Nile's rise, exploiting water transport when the flood turns fields into lanes. The project breathes with the river's pulse, storing when it must, surging when it can. Rations map onto that rhythm. A flood season's swell of labour means an uptick in baking and brewing. The permanent shops keep cadence, sharpening copper tools and replenishing abrasives for saws and drills. Rope shops twist fibre into lengths you can trust to grip a sled. Sleds themselves take maintenance. Runners smoothed, lashings replaced, drag surfaces wetted to ease friction over packed tracks. Each task sits on a timetable, so a missed delivery does not stall a crew a mile away. Look at the galleries again. They are efficient, not punitive. Raised sleeping platforms keep bodies off cool ground. Hearths cluster for shared cooking and heat. Pottery forms are standardized, a sign of bulk manufacture to serve a steady population. The ceramics speak in the language of scale. When shapes repeat, so do routines. Even burials near the site argue for value placed on the workforce. Honor interments within view of the plateau signal inclusion in the project's social world. Grave goods are modest but intentional. This is the resting place for people recognized for their part in the work. You do not bury slaves next to a royal construction while recording their crew names on building stones. You bury participants. Pay close attention to the paperless paperwork. Seal impressions, docket lines on jar stoppers, tally marks on ostraca, the disposable records of a living bureaucracy. They show movement and accountability. Rations out, deliveries in. Tools issued, tools returned. The system tracks, corrects, and repeats. That is how you hold standards across seasons and supervisors. The town's layout solves very specific problems. Proximity to ramps means short commutes for heavy crews. A clear run to the harbour means stone can pass from boat to yard without crossing through living quarters. Specialised yards sit between housing and the work phase. A buffer where noise and dust can be managed. This is zoning, ancient and blunt, but effective. You can feel the project's intent in this order. If the goal were brute spectacle alone, you would expect waste. People burned through and discarded. Instead, you see investment in longevity. A worker fed well works longer. A worker treated for injury returns with experience. A crew with a name leaves its mark on the block and carries pride to the next lift. Loyalty is a tool in the kit. The town at the edge of the plateau is the counter-argument embodied. It shows local salaried labour with provisions, rotations and care. The workforce lived within a system that understood time as a resource and people as assets whose skills matured. That is craftsmanship nested inside administration. A society bringing its agricultural calendar, its river, and its bureaucracy into alignment with the work. And this tells us the motive reached beyond hauling stone. A national project of this sophistication bends logistics toward meaning. The builders treated the site as a duty bound to the king and to order itself. With hands accounted for, we turn to what those hands believed they were building. Chapter 3. The King's Second Life. If a pyramid is a tomb, why invest in alignments that outlive the body? The question cuts to the core of Old Kingdom thought, where a king did not cease at death. He changed states. In that world, a person was not a single thing. He held a car, a vital essence that required sustenance. He carried a BA, a mobile personality with agency. When a pharaoh died, these parts did not dissolve. They entered a cycle, and the state had to stage that cycle with ritual and with stone. You feel that structure the moment you trace the complex outside the pyramid's face. The valley temple anchors the threshold where the river meets the desert. Offerings begin there, set with rule and repetition. A causeway climbs from that low shore to the plateau. A controlled route for processions, not a road for carts. At the top, the mortuary temple receives the king. There, priests maintain a schedule of bread, beer, meat, and incense for the car. These offerings were not sentiment. They were fuel in a system that demanded continuity. Boat pits sit beside the monument like folded instructions. Boats carried practical goods on the Nile in life, and in death they shift status. In the afterlife, a vessel is a vehicle through dangerous regions, a means to join the solar bark, or cross the waters of the Duat, the underworld. Their presence near the pyramid is an architectural sentence. The voyage continues, the king travels. This is where the tomb versus machine tension sharpens. A burial place seals a body. A ritual machine coordinates space, time, and movement to transform. The pyramid texts, Egypt's earliest funerary corpus, describe that transformation as a climb, a flight, a joining with cosmic powers. They do not read as a quiet rest. They read as a journey with hazards and assists, waypoints and outcomes. The cosmos itself becomes a map. The Duat is not a vague shadowland. It has regions, gates, and guardians. The sky has domains with different fates. The circumpolar stars, those near the north celestial pole, never set. In Egyptian eyes, that made them imperishable, a model of undying presence. The imperishable north becomes the aim for a ruler seeking an eternal station. Align a monument to true north, and you speak to that destiny without a word. Within this program, the pyramid's small shafts take on function beyond airways. They lead out from chambers where the king's body and rites sit, cut at fixed inclinations and headings. In a mortuary system that stages ascent, a narrow, unwavering channel can act as a symbolic conduit. It is not a passage for a person. It is a statement that the path is set. The shaft says, this is the direction of becoming. The building's skin amplified the message. Polished limestone casing turned the pyramid into a reflective plane, catching the sun hard enough to read at distance. Light implies renewal. Each dawn resets the world. Each noon declares power. Axial symmetry reigns in chaos. When a plan holds to clear axes, it manifests Ma'at. sacred order, balance, and rightness. The king's image as maintainer of Ma'at gains a body in the geometry itself. Text and stone converge on specific targets. The pyramid texts tie the dead king to cosmic actors, not as metaphor alone, but as station. Orion's belt, Sa, threads into the identity of Osiris, lord of rebirth. Sirius, Sopdet, heralds the flood and is bound to Isis, protector and restorer. The circumpolars grant endurance. When you see a shaft hold a line toward a declination that matches the star at the time, you are watching ritual intent translated into architecture. This does not mean every alignment measured is a gauge in a lab. These are ritual instruments. A shaft may frame a rising at a season. It may stage a transit at a time of night tied to rites. The point was not data collection. The point was synchronization, bringing the king's transformation into phase with a reliable sky. In a world where the sun's cycle and the river's cycle ordered life, tying the royal fate to celestial regularity made political and theological sense. The ground components sustain the same logic. Daily offerings feed the car so the BA can choose and move. Priests recite spells at stations along the temple axis. Processions reenact the path, so time does not loosen it. The causeway binds valley to high desert, reiterating a move from fertile life to sacred dryness and back through ritual return. Boat pits keep the means of travel available. Everything around the core leans toward continuity. You can test the ambition by the details. The cardinal orientation locks the monument to stable references. The casing, now mostly gone, once created a visual field that changed with the sun, yet never budged in plan. The interior axes cross at the king's chamber like an intersection of storylines. Body, offering, ascent. The shafts carry that last vector outward, bridging closed stone and open sky. What did the builders believe this would accomplish? Not a memory alone, but an outcome. A guaranteed ascent. The pharaoh's car sustained, his bar directed, his identity joined to imperishable stars, with Osiris and the cycle of renewal securing legitimacy that outlives a single reign. Stone speaks theology. Structure becomes a ritual path you can walk with offerings, echo in recitation, and align with lights that keep their appointments. And those paths trace specific lights in the night. Chapter 4. The shafts aim north. Why carve narrow tunnels that lead nowhere, unless their destination wasn't on Earth? Inside the Great Pyramid, 4 slender shafts cut out from the king's and queen's chambers. They run at fixed angles, tight in width, and stubborn in direction. You cannot crawl through them. You can barely see their paths without tools, but they hold their lines, as if each bore a message that had to reach a specific point in the sky. 2 of the shafts start in the king's chamber, 2 in the queen's chamber. The upper pair, north and south, break through to the exterior. The lower pair stop short and were found sealed. Their sizes are consistent along their runs. Their turns are deliberate, with small jogs to avoid blocks, while still protecting the overall target. If these were only decorative, the effort would make no sense. If they were only practical, their precision would be unnecessary. The paradox makes them compelling. The tension lies in their scale. They are too narrow for people and too precise to dismiss. When surveyed, each shaft showed a clear inclination and azimuth, the angle up from level and the compass direction in plan. Taken together, those numbers let you project a line into the sky. Project that line not for today, but for the period of construction, and candidate stars come into view. This is where the question becomes specific. What or who sits at the end of each path? proposed alignments center on names woven into royal afterlife theology. The southern shaft from the king's chamber has been linked to Alnitak in Orion's belt, a star bound to the figure of Osiris, lord of death and renewal. The northern shaft from that same chamber has been associated with the circumpolar field, the imperishable stars that never set. From the Queen's chamber, the southern shaft has been tied to Sirius, the star connected to Isis and the rising of the Nile. The northern lower shaft again points near the undying region around true north. Taken as a set, the pattern echoes the king's ascent through companions who guarantee rebirth and endurance. The geometry supports the idea. Inclinations stabilize the target's altitude. Azimuths keep the compass bearing disciplined. Because the sky slowly drifts over centuries, a line that hits a star at one epoch will miss it later. That drift, precession, turns these shafts into time-stamped gestures. They are like sight lines frozen for a particular night sky. The fit is not perfect in every proposal, but the convergence on Orion, Sirius, and the circumpolar's mirrors roles named in the mortuary texts and rites. Then come the doors. The lower shaft terminate in limestone blockages fitted with small copper components. These were not vents left open to the air. They were sealed, and sealed with care. When probes met those barriers, their cameras found the copper pieces embedded like handles or fixings. Later explorations revealed another block beyond one of the first doors, which deepened the puzzle. A functional airway does not end with a locked gate. A symbolic corridor can. This leads to the practical debate. Some have called the shafts ventilation, a means to clear stale air during work or keep interiors dry. Others argue for structural relief, voids that lighten loads and control cracking. Both would have value in a massive masonry body, but the combination of steady inclination, consistent cross-section, and aimed azimuths sits uneasily with ventilation alone. Air can move through rougher paths. Load relief can be irregular. Here we see lines that behave like side tubes. The strongest reading, given what survives, is that the shafts served ritual functions first. They acted as star corridors, fixed routes for the king's immaterial aspects to reach named lights. That does not rule out secondary roles. A channel can also let air pass during construction. A void can also reduce stress. Dual-purpose elements are common in good design, but the ceremonially sealed ends, the copper fittings, and the specificity of aim push the balance toward meaning layered over method. Measurements give us confidence in the aim. Intention is harder. We can trace the lines with instruments and match them to stars important in the royal program. We can read the doors and fittings as elevated treatment, not an accident of masonry. We can connect the targets to beliefs about Osiris, Isis, and the imperishables. What we cannot do is open a contemporary text that states the plan in a single sentence. The shafts sit at the intersection, where architecture is clear and motive relies on context. Think of each as a letterbox set into the stone, sized for messages, not for bodies. The slot never moves. The recipient, Sopdet, Sa, the imperishable north, keeps its appointment on the cycle. A priest could not stand inside and watch a star transit. That was not the point. The ritual depended on assurance. Orientation stands in for motion. The line proves fidelity. The rest belongs to liturgy spoken in darkness, and to a calendar tuned to predictable risings. We should not miss the constraint that makes this work. The pyramid as a whole holds to true north with great care. A shaft that aims toward a northern imperishable picks up that same spine. The southern shafts speak to the bright partners in the mythology of renewal. The set reads like an internal constellation made of stone, each ray giving the king a means to fix his course. So when we ask why these narrow tunnels exist, the best supported answer is disciplined and measured. They are ritual star corridors for the royal ascent, built with enough exactness to honor specific celestial partners, and flexible enough to lend practical help when needed. Precision here is not ornament. It is a vow kept in limestone. But outside, the entire plateau may map the sky. Chapter 5. Orion on the ground. Do 3 pyramids echo 3 stars? Or are we drawing constellations after the fact? The Orion correlation theory steps into that question with a bold claim. The layout of Giza mirrors Orion's belt. 3 lights translated into 3 monuments, offset and rotated as if the sky had been lowered onto the desert. It is tidy, it is memorable, and it asks us to accept that city-scale planning followed a stellar template. Here is the pitch. The Great Pyramid and its 2 companions stand not in a straight row, but with an offset. That stagger, fans say, mirrors the way Orion's belt shows 1 star slightly askew from the line. Rotate the star pattern to match the river's course, and the Nile becomes the Milky Way, a cosmic river beside a desert of sand. The pyramids, in this view, are not just graves. They are ground stars, placed to lock the king to Orion, the figure tied to Osiris, and the promise of rebirth. The symmetry seduces because it speaks to a habit we already see. Strong cardinal alignments, ritual pathways, and star names in the funerary texts. A belt on the ground seems like the natural next step. You can draw lines, set overlays, and watch shapes click into place. The story writes itself with a neat flourish. A pattern in the sky finds its echo in stone. The pull of that elegance is real. But elegance is not the same as proof. Critics raise 2 immediate cautions. First, the fit is loose. The pyramid positions approximate the belt, but not with the fidelity you would expect if a strict diagram guided the surveyor's stakes. The distances and angles can be massaged to match, yet the match depends on how you scale and rotate the overlay. Change the choices, and the fit changes. Second, the selection is subjective. Why Orion's belt, and not another asterism of 3? Why the belt, but not the other bright stars in Orion's body? When the rest of the constellation fails to find ground anchors, the risk of cherry-picking rises. The land itself pushes back. The plateau is not a blank slate. Bedrock highs, older quarry scars, and stable edges constrain where colossal foundations can sit. Engineers prefer competent rock, not fill. Builders favor sight lines that keep ramps and causeways viable. Those pressures can force an offset without anyone consulting the sky. A plan that looks astral from above may be the least problematic solution carved into a stubborn ridge. Scale the model, and more snags appear. The Nile is Milky Way analogy, rests on a broad similarity. River beside row. But distance and proportion do not hold in any strict sense. A river meanders. The Milky Way arcs. A belt is tight. The pyramid fields span long walks. You can claim metaphor and get away with it. You cannot claim a survey-grade match without bending the data around a hope. Then there is time. The sky is not fixed. Precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, shifts stellar positions over centuries. A plan keyed to a specific look of the belt must choose an epoch. If you shift the reference date, the angle and spacing on the horizon change. Debates over dating hook onto that fact. Anchor the correlation to a sky centuries before or after the Old Kingdom, and you can improve the fit in the overlay. But you then open a problem. The builders would have had to target a sky they did not see, or we must move the monuments in time. Neither path finds support in the broader archaeological record. Statistical caution joins the chorus. In a landscape with many possible points, some subset will fall into patterns that resemble familiar shapes. Our minds seek order, especially with constellations we know well. Fit testing demands more than a visual rhyme. It requires a testable rule that excludes other layouts and still lands on the one we see. When alternate arrangements on the same plateau can match other star trios with similar ease, confidence drops. At the same time, outright dismissal ignores the weight of symbolism. Egypt's royal program speaks the language of stars. Orion, bound to Osiris, is not a random pick from a neutral catalogue. The name carried theological gravity. That context makes a symbolic echo plausible even if a survey map of the belt on the ground falls short. A designer could allude to Orion without imposing a rigid sky-to-sand correspondence. This is where most specialists land. They accept that the culture fused kingship and cosmos. They accept that Orion mattered. They point, however, to the primary function of the complex as a mortuary system and to the practical realities of building on a specific plateau. A site-wide star chart, they argue, asks for a level of positional discipline and ancillary markers that we do not find. A symbolic reference costs less and fits better with the rest of the evidence. So what can we claim responsibly? The theory offers a provocative template that links a king to Orion's field, consistent with text and with star-focused rites. It sharpens our eye to the way cosmic language permeates the project. But as a master plan that dictated the exact siting of every mass, it remains unproven. The geology speaks, the quarries speak, the ramps and causeways speak. They do not sound like servants of a rigid constellation map. Think of the plateau not as a printed star chart, but as a stage where star stories were performed. The belt may have been a reference, a name, a powerful metaphor. The stones follow structural logic first, ritual logic next, and poetic logic running through both. The blueprint is uncertain. The symbolism is likely. If not a sky map, could the pyramid itself be a kind of instrument? Chapter 6. Stone, Light and Time. Could a tomb double as a passive observatory without lenses or gears? Stand near the base at dusk, and the structure begins to talk in shadows. Corners sharpen, faces cool. The axes hold steady as night unfolds. You don't need a dial or a mirror for a building to keep time. You need stone that refuses to drift, and openings that know where to look. Architecture can encode cycles. A wall aimed at true east meets sunrise the same way every season, while a westward axis catches the retreat of light. Long corridors act like side tubes. Doorways become gates that admit a blade of sun on a certain morning, or a faint star on a dependable night. When that geometry is strict, the building is not idle. It interacts with the sky like a rig without moving parts. Sightlines mark the path. At Giza, the strong cardinal orientation puts the monument in dialogue with predictable events. True east and west bind dawn and dusk. North ties the mass to the region of stars that seem to circle without setting. South keeps watch over fields where seasonal risings announce change. Horizon profiles matter too. A low, clean eastern line lets the first light strike with precision. A clear western drop lets the last light leave a sharp signature. Evidence of intention survives in the angles themselves. The faces answer the compass with confidence. The base stays level within a tight band. Inside, narrow shafts hold their inclinations over long runs. Those facts justify the question. But the next step, calling the whole a scientific instrument, demands restraint. We have lines that behave like guides. We do not have a manual that names their readings. Analogies from elsewhere help us see how stone can time the sky. A number of ancient temples frame solstices with corridors that glow for a few minutes on the appointed day. Shrines were built to catch equinox dawn in a squared doorway, or to channel a noonday sunbeam onto a fixed point once a year. These are not proofs for Giza, but they show the method. You freeze geometry, and then you let the heavens complete the circuit. Apply that to the plateau. With cardinal orientation, the pyramid's edges register the sun's drift across the seasons as the angle of shadow narrows or widens at noon. The brilliant casing, when it still sheathed the core, would have exaggerated thresholds, the moment a face tipped from glare to shade, or shade to glare. Those thresholds could cue rights at fixed days, not by counting hours, but by reading edges. Now bring the shafts back into view. A narrow tube set at a stable azimuth and inclination can frame a heliacal rising, the first dawn after a star returns from the sun's glare, or a meridian transit when a star crosses due south or due north at night. Because Earth's axis wobbles slowly, the exact star framed by a given line changes over centuries. That makes a shaft a clock hand that points to a name during an era, then to empty space later. If a rite needed confirmation at a predictable season, say, the reappearance of a star linked to renewal, the architecture could supply a window, not for people to watch, but for timing to be anchored to the sky. This leans toward ritual timekeeping. The builders did not need to log degrees. They needed to know when to enact offerings, recitations, and processions with cosmic backing. A building set to the cardinal grid and equipped with dependable sightlines could structure the calendar of acts. In that frame, precision is not an academic exercise. It is a guarantor that the rite occurs on time, in a universe that signals with light. The case grows when you consider dual-purpose design. Mortuary demands and cosmic schedule can share the same parts. An axis that keeps a temple aligned also keeps a shadow event regular. A shaft that carries a ritual meaning can, during the build, move air or lighten load. A casing that proclaims order to the living also gives crisp transitions that cue the priests. Nothing in that list violates function. It folds functions together. Yet, the burden of proof remains high. We can measure angles and show that they are exact. We can test hypothetical sky events against those angles and find plausible matches at certain epochs. We can even reconstruct how light would have worked on polished faces. What we cannot do is quote a contemporary Old Kingdom text that declares plainly that the pyramid operated as a measuring device. The phrase passive observatory is ours, not theirs. So we settle on a careful verdict. The evidence for an astronomical instrument in the strict sense is thin. The evidence for architecture tuned to celestial cycles is stronger. Precise cardinal orientation, horizon-aware sighting, and shafts with disciplined directions that align with ritually charged stars during the period of construction. That cluster is limited but suggestive. It supports a reading in which the monument schedules sacred acts by referencing sky events, not by collecting data for its own sake. If you accept that, the building stops being mute mass. It becomes a calendar embedded in stone, a ritual clock that does not tick, yet keeps faith with seasonal signs and stellar appointments. The tomb serves its core purpose, and at the same time, it holds the king's rights in step with the lights that do not miss their cues. Even the interior stones whisper craft beyond spectacle. Chapter 7. The hidden grammar of granite. What story do the joints tell when metal is soft and granite is hard? You run your hand along a seam in the king's chamber, and the gap shrinks to a hair. The walls are granite, unforgiving and dense, yet the planes meet with a discipline that resists casual explanation. In the grand gallery, steps and ramps lock into a geometry that feels taut, as if the room were braced by an invisible rule. The paradox holds steady. Copper is pliant, granite is not. And still, the fit is calm. Start with the obvious hurdle. Copper alone cannot machine granite the way steel can, but copper can steer. The cutting happens when you recruit a harder partner. Quartz sand, abundant, sharp and stubborn, turns a soft saw into a guided stream of grit. The blade carries the abrasive eats the crystal. The same logic applies to tubular drills. A copper tube, rotated with pressure and fed with sand slurry, wears a precise ring into stone. It is slow, it is repeatable. It leaves a surface that can be trued by a hand with stone rubbers and finer grit until a plane emerges. The king's chamber tells this method in layers. Its blocks are granite beams set with intent, their faces flattened to meet without rocking. Where the joint closes, gypsum mortar lines whisper in pale streaks. Thin films used to kill micro-highs and spread load, not to hide rough work. The ceiling presses the point further. Above the visible roof, a stack of relieving chambers step the weight away, each tier of beams forming a staged release. Those beams do not simply lie there. They align, they bear, and they transfer, turning a crush into a managed push. Climb mentally into the relieving spaces and the craft continues. Granite laid across granite needs foresight. Beams must be sized, dressed and set so that contact rests where the force wants to travel. An off-true face would invite a crack. A good face turns shock into flow. The grammar of the joint is quiet. Keep planes honest. Let the mortar be a film. Make the block carry its share. Where thousands of tons settle, indecision breaks things. The grand gallery plays a different tune, but with the same meter. Long corbelled courses step inward, each ledge bearing on the one beneath. Riser stones, slots, and ramps coordinate movement and control. Surfaces you can see read clean, scribed and finished. Surfaces you cannot see tell a rougher story. Tool marks, pick strokes, rock left proud where no ritual eye would fall and no stress would complain. The distinction matters. It signals priority and method. Quality control survives in red. Red ochre marks and layout lines cross faces at angles, tick points and guide edges. They are the stage directions left for the crew, where to trim, where to seat, where to check. An inked sign can hold a standard in the deafening noise of a build. You can follow these lines from dressing yard to placement, a faint ledger written in pigment and stone. When a block arrives with marks aligned to a grid, the team knows exactly how to reconcile it with its neighbors. This is laborious work. Experiments with abrasive sawing and drilling return sober numbers. Cutting granite with a copper saw and quartz sand yields forward motion measured in millimeters per hour, not inches. Tubular drilling, again with sand in slurry, eats rings at a pace that demands many hands and many hours. Spread across seasons and crews, those rates make sense, especially when you accept that only some faces must achieve that finish. A beam's bearing surface must be honest. Its hidden core can retain the quarry's scars. The ceiling of the king's chamber draws strength from this selectivity. Beams are dressed where they meet mates and where they seat onto walls. Their undersides present a reading of order to those below. Their tops, unseen, can be less refined. The relieving chambers repeat the rule. Contact faces trued, voids and backs left as quarried. By concentrating excellence at joints, the builders conserve skill where it buys safety and meaning. Mortar ties choices together. Gypsum paste fills microvoids and binds fine grit, acting as a compliant skin that lets hard faces find each other. Too thick, and the joint behaves like a cushion that creeps. Thin, and it becomes a buffer that smooths insult without swallowing force. You can see how the masons thought, press the joint until the paste just smears, then stop. Let stone talk to stone. Even the pace of the cut becomes policy. A slow, predictable rate makes scheduling possible. If a crew knows a beam face will take days to true, foremen can stage lifts, cure mortar, and move men where progress is guaranteed. Ramps and galleries become metronomes. Dressing yards feed a queue. Every finished surface is a promise cashed in by the next team. Note how the finish clusters around ritual paths. The Grand Gallery's precision supports movement and ceremony as much as it supports stone. The King's Chamber's clarity frames the sarcophagus and the axes that define the building's story. Elsewhere, in cores and backs, roughness reigns. Tool marks keep company with voids filled by rubble and chocking stones. That contrast does not indict the whole, it explains it. The monument is not uniformly perfect, it is strategically perfect. Taken together, the joints speak a language of selective excellence. Where forces converge, the work is exact. Where rights pass, the work is refined. Where neither demand presses, surfaces relax into honest roughness. Copper never became steel. Copper became a guide for grit. Mortar never hid errors. Mortar smoothed truth. Granite never yielded by charm. It yielded to method, time, and a relentless standard applied only where it purchased stability or sanctity. This is how precision emerges from limits. You do not fight the material with bravado. You choose where to spend pain. You finish where the structure insists and where the ritual requires. You accept the quarry's voice where it does not matter. The result feels improbable until you read the joints. Then it reads inevitable. New scans now peer into what the builders left sealed. Chapter 8. The New Void. What does the silent space above the Grand Gallery add to a 4,500-year-old debate? You look up through layers of stone that feel solid as law, and the report lands. There is a gap inside the mass, where no passage was mapped, no chamber was expected. A void where weight should be. A quiet pocket in a place that thrives on pressure and plan. Muon tomography brought it to light. Muons are high-energy particles that rain down from cosmic rays. They pass through stone and lose energy based on how much material they cross. Set detectors inside and let them count. Over time, denser zones absorb more. Emptier zones let more pass. The contrast draws a ghost image of the interior. It is non-invasive, which preserves the monument. It is also low resolution, which blurs the edges of any discovery. The scan's outline shows an elongated volume above the Grand Gallery, set along the pyramid's axis, large enough to command attention. It is not a hairline crack or a small pocket left by chance. It reads as a deliberate space or a managed absence. That is enough to trigger arguments that spiral far beyond the initial data. One school sees an engineering cavity, mass removed to ease stresses sitting over the steep corridor. redistributing load in a structure that already uses stacked relieving chambers. Another school sees a corridor or a chamber left out of our maps, a place where ritual or logistics once passed and then was sealed. Both interpretations have legs. Ancient builders knew how to lighten stone above vulnerable spans. The king's chamber wears that knowledge in plain sight, with its tiered cavities. In that reading, the void above the grand gallery extends a grammar we already recognize. Staged emptiness that teaches the stone where to lay down its weight. But the placement, long, axial, and aligned with a ceremonial artery, tempts a different reading. If corridors down below coordinate movement, could a hidden passage above coordinate meaning? The pyramid's interior is a palimpsest. A new line urges us to read again. We should stress the method's limits. Mun data give volumes, not finished floor plans. The edges are fuzzy. The shape is inferred. Nothing in the scan tells us about doorways, ramps, or fittings. It tells us where stone gives way to air with statistical confidence. For a monument, this restraint is a gift. The walls stay closed while knowledge inches forward. For the public imagination, restraint feels like a provocation. The map shows a blank. People rush to fill it. Policies of preservation slow direct inspection. That caution is earned. Every probe risks damage. Every borehole opens a precedent. In a place where the casing is lost and the core bears scars of past intrusions, guardians choose patience. That patience keeps the pyramid standing. It also inflames curiosity. The void sits in the mind like an unopened letter. Threads tie the new space to older puzzles. The small doors in the Queen's chamber shafts, with their neat copper fittings, already taught us that sealed features can carry ritual weight. Probes pushed, then halted, when second blockages appeared. The message was in direction, a path that said, this far, no further, yet was crafted with care. The void above the grand gallery rhymes with that logic. It is present by absence. It is defined by what it withholds. Think of the pyramid as an upside-down archipelago. Solid stone as sea, cavities as islands. Each island alters the current, reroutes force, or marks a place on a ritual map only the builders could read. The new island sits along a main shipping lane. Engineers study the currents. Storytellers study the charts. Both are doing their jobs. Both are limited by weathered ink. The discovery tests our discipline. Do we rush to crown it as a lost haul, a hidden cache, a key that will unlock a new chamber of meaning? Or do we accept a narrower gain, confirmation that the interior planning was more layered than the corridors we walk suggest? A measured stance gives us more runway. We can ask, if it is a stress relief space, how does its geometry compare to the known relieving tiers? Does it align precisely with points of high thrust from the corbelled gallery beneath? If it is a corridor, where would an opening hide? What sequence of stones above the gallery could mask an access route without leaving tool signatures on exposed faces? The answer will likely require a blend. More Moon exposure time to sharpen resolution. Complementary scans from other positions to triangulate the volume. And, if permitted, microendoscopic work through existing joints or past breaches that avoids fresh damage. Until then, the void anchors a conversation rather than closes one. It proves that the builders planned internal absence at large scale, not only small cavities above a royal chamber. It suggests that their tool was not mass alone, but the careful use of emptiness. For our purpose, the mini payoff is clear. The scans extend a pattern we have seen for hours now, complex internal planning that solves structural problems, and at times shades into symbolic design. The function of the new space remains unproven. The existence is secure. In a monument that trades in alignments and thresholds, that is enough to raise the stakes without claiming a prize. One more riddle remains at the heart of the tomb. The missing king. Chapter 9. The absent pharaoh. If the Great Pyramid is a tomb, why has no mummy been found inside it? You stand in the king's chamber and meet the object that should settle the case. A granite sarcophagus, heavy, plain, and built to endure. Its lid is gone. Its interior is empty. Above and below, passages tell a story of deliberate movement through stone. Yet the central bed of the burial, vacant. That absence fuels a dispute that refuses to fade. We revisit how the pyramid opened to history. Ancient intruders breached the structure long before scholars took notes. When later explorers reached the chambers, they met voids, not treasures. Granite plugs still jammed the ascending passage. The grotto sat rough and raw. The grand gallery climbed like a ceremonial spine to an unoccupied heart. Where a wrapped body should rest, there was air and dust. The setting implies a burial. The scene reads as aftermath. That emptiness pulls theories into orbit. One argues the king never lay here. The monument functioned as a cenotaph, a symbolic house of eternity without a resident. Another insists the burial occurred, but was relocated, perhaps during a crisis, to keep the royal body and equipment safe from organized theft. A third, the most prosaic and still powerful, holds that tomb robbers penetrated the core in antiquity, stripped goods, and removed remains long before any modern gaze. Context matters. Many Old Kingdom tombs bear scars of looting. Doors were forced. Sarcophagi were pried. Chambers were ransacked for metals and resellable goods. Inscriptions in other pyramid complexes and mastabas describe funerary offerings, rites, and the king's transformation. The broader record makes royal burials in pyramids a baseline assumption. The Great Pyramid's silence, placed against that chorus, looks less like a counterexample and more like a gap created by human predation. The sarcophagus itself strengthens that reading. It is oversized for its doorway, which implies it was placed during construction, and the chamber completed around it. That is a builder's choice made for a permanent occupant. The chamber's relieving systems, the tight joints, and the axial position elevate the room's status within the monument. None of this proves a body lay there, but it stacks probabilities toward a functional burial suite that later lost its contents. Across the plateau, inscriptions and reliefs outside this pyramid reinforce a funerary landscape. Valley temples, causeways, and mortuary temples thread offerings and processions into a daily mechanism. Priests staffed these places for generations, feeding the king's car with bread and beer. Boat pits provided the means to travel in story and in ritual imagination. A tomb is not a box. It is a system. The Great Pyramid sits inside that system like a keystone. Alternative claims step forward with confidence. They say the building's prime function was not funerary. They point to precise alignments, to shafts with stellar bearings, and to the lack of explicit contemporaneous building records that spell out, this is the burial of this named king, inside the core. They recast the structure as a temple of knowledge, an engine of initiation, or an instrument of state power without a corpse. The appeal is clear. The absence invites a substitute, but it was a ritual machine for rebirth housed within a tomb-centric complex. The shafts can serve celestial aims and still belong to a mortuary program. Cardinal orientation can honor cosmic order and ground a burial. Precision does not cancel funerary purpose. It declares it with confidence. Without a signed inventory from the day of sealing, we pass the built evidence and the cultural text. The weight falls on the tomb model. Another caution sits at the edge of our certainty. We lack direct contemporary construction records for the Great Pyramid that narrate the work step by step. No on-site logbook survives to say when the sarcophagus was lowered, who sealed the chamber, or how the guards rotated. That void in paperwork does not grant freedom to invent. It demands we thread the line between the artifact in the room and the larger Old Kingdom pattern that repeats across sites. So we weigh silence against surroundings. The chamber is empty. The sarcophagus is present. The complex around it obeys the grammar of royal mortuary architecture. The cultural script ties the king to offerings, to processions, to cosmic ascent. Other pyramids and tombs, when found unstripped, contain burials and goods that match the script. The likeliest path is a burial placed, honored, then removed by hands we will never name, at a time we cannot fix. This leaves a narrow but solid payoff. Why no confirmed mummy in the Great Pyramid? The simplest explanation is removal in antiquity, whether by theft or state action in troubled years. The absence does not overturn the tomb model. The sarcophagus, set during construction, the chamber's architectural privilege, and the surrounding funerary complex support the standard reading. Alignments and star language enrich that reading rather than displace it. You feel the paradox harden as you stand there. A tomb with no body, a ritual schedule with no voice left to recite it, stone that tells us what should have happened, and an empty box that tells us what did. The balance holds because both can be true at once. A royal tomb realized in full, and then unmade in its contents by later intent. We are left between two strong lights, faith in the afterlife and fascination with the sky. Chapter 10. Tomb or template? What if the safest answer is that one purpose required the other? A royal tomb that only works if it speaks the language of the sky. A cosmic template that only matters if a king's body anchors it in law and ritual. The two stories do not cancel. They lock together like stones on a true bed. We have walked both paths. On one, the monument is a mortuary vessel, a sarcophagus placed during construction, relieving systems above a royal chamber, a causeway and temple that feed the Kai with scheduled offerings. On the other, the mass is tuned to something larger, a base aligned to the cardinal points, interior shafts that refuse to wander, sightlines that seem to name the imperishables and the bright heralds of renewal. Each path is persuasive when taken alone. Together, they demand something harder than a slogan. You want a verdict. We all do. But the evidence asks for humility. It resists a neat ruling because it was never built to satisfy our categories. It served theology, kingship, and engineering at once. It was a machine for continuity disguised as a hill. Start with the ledger of fact. The builder's town stands within sight. Planned galleries for sleep, bakeries and breweries for fuel, ration records and ceilings that show a bureaucracy moving supplies with cadence. The funerary complex locks the monument into a daily schedule. Valley temple to mortuary temple along a fixed axis. Boat pits that hold vessels for ritual travel, and a causeway that ritualizes movement from river to desert. Inside the pyramid texts in later monuments map the king's ascent, name his companions, and give us the horizon of meaning into which this structure fits. Over and under it all, the cardinal precision holds the plan steady against drift. Now the ledger of speculation. The Orion correlation proposes that the three pyramids mirror three belt stars. The plateau as sky map suggests that the Nile takes the role of the Milky Way, and the monuments plot a constellation across ground. The instrument claims argue that these stones do more than symbolize. They measure or schedule, turning alignments and shafts into a kind of passive observatory. Each proposal carries an allure. Each pushes beyond what the stone alone can prove. They do useful work by sharpening questions, but they also lean on choices of scale, rotation, and interpretation that the sight does not force. Notice where the ledges touch. The shafts bear disciplined azimuths and inclinations, and they sit inside a complex whose daily business is funerary. Doors at their ends are sealed, not ventilated. Copper fittings appear where no airflow is required. These are not random holes. They are precise paths cut within a tomb-centric program. The lines blur there because the same cut can satisfy two masters. A ritual corridor aimed at a named star and a structural or construction aid that incidentally moves air. The overlap is not a flaw. It is a clue to intent. A balanced synthesis respects both ledges without rewarding excess. The monument reads as ritual architecture that stages a celestial rebirth. The king's second life needed more than a sarcophagus. It needed a schedule and a map. The complex provides the schedule, offerings, processions, and recitations that keep the K supplied. The alignments provide the map, true north to anchor imperishability, southern sightlines to address the partners in renewal. The building does not count degrees for curiosity. It sinks rights to a sky that keeps appointments. Think of the structure as a theatre of eternity. The stage is stone. The script is liturgy and law. The lighting is the sun on polished faces and stars held at fixed angles through narrow veins of air. When the season turns, the light returns. When the priest climbs the steps, the words return. The audience is the state and the dead together, each requiring the other to complete the act. In that theatre, precision is not luxury. Precision is the guarantee that the cue arrives on time. This does not hand victory to the widest sky map or the bravest instrument claim. It keeps their most disciplined insights. Yes, the plateau respects geology, quarries, and ramps as hard constraints. Yes, visual overlays can be bent to fit a favored constellation. Those cautions stand. But the team that squared the base to the cardinal points and drove shafts along stubborn bearings was not indifferent to the sky. They used the sky as a regulator for rites embedded in a mortuary system. In that sense, the building operates as an instrument, only as a ritual clock, not a device for measurement. The evidence for that limited instrumentality, precise orientation, stable shaft angles, and correspondences with stars charged in the royal program, is real, if bounded. So we accept the tension as the answer. The tomb works because it is tuned. The tuning matters because a royal burial anchors it. Stone gives the rite a body. Light gives the rite a schedule. Texts give the rite a voice. The union is where the monument lives, and where our modern categories stumble. And that brings us to the question the pyramid turns back on us. What do we require from the past? A single function that flatters our need for clarity, or a layered purpose that asks us to sit with ambiguity? The stones do not volunteer a confession. They show methods. They imply beliefs. They refuse explanation on demand. The payoff is steady, not loud. The evidence supports a modest astronomical role inside a dominant mortuary frame. The structure functions as a theatre of eternity, tuned to the night. where alignment and ritual make a promise on behalf of a king. And so the monument keeps its silence, and we keep asking. Conclusion. The Great Pyramid sits where theology, engineering, and skywatching converge. Less a machine than a ritual clock set to eternity. Stone fixes the schedule. Light supplies the cue. The sky keeps the promise. Where do you stand tonight? Tomb, template, or both? Leave your case in the comments. Like and subscribe to join the next quiet expedition. Your support lets us keep reading the old alignments with a steady hand. The granite remains. The alignments hold. The voids keep their counsel. The stars still rise on schedule. And the doors in the stone are not done speaking.